So this is Alfredo.
This is Hubert.
Welcome in São Paulo.
So, welcome to Urban Parangolé. The idea of a parangolé, what is that? It's coming from the artist, Brazilian artist, Hélio Oiticica. And Hélio Oiticica had some fantastic artworks that were body works, that were clothes that people would wear, and it was all about the body and the movement and the space in between the fabric and the body. And we were very inspired by this rhythmic color movement on the street as he portrayed it. And we thought, how can we take that to a three-dimensional level?
So why São Paulo? You know, São Paulo is this city where you meet a Japanese who speaks Brazilian with an Italian accent. It's this really global city, and we think that São Paulo in the 70s, in the 60s, in the 50s already, had actually the same explosive development, that growth that you know now from African and Asian cities. So we think São Paulo now, in a moment of consolidation, is actually the benchmark of what is happening in urban conditions today. If we know how to manage São Paulo, you will be able to manage Asian African cities.
Claude Lévi-Strauss thought that São Paulo was not an ugly city, but actually he called it a wild town. Although much has changed since 1955, when he wrote the famous book, Triste Tropique, São Paulo maintains a certain wild quality, a vibrancy that draws people to its streets. And we want to maintain that and increment that.
So we asked ourselves, mobility is the answer, but what was actually the question, right? So in cities like Sao Paulo, as they grow, and Sao Paulo grew 5 times over the last century, 5-fold, urban villages have actually emerged. You're all familiar with the idea of the urban village, Marshall McLuhan. What we like to introduce to you now, both as a concept, as a shape, and as an idea, is actually this mobile village. Because we believe that mobility will shape our cities more than anything else. In the past, and if you know Wilhelm Flusser, Czech philosopher who spent half of his life, his second half of his life in Sao Paulo, he actually found that you see that we were perfect as Western societies to organize the two-dimensional ground plane and then extrude property situations vertically and a little bit down and a lot up, skyscrapers and basements. But we did not appreciate the three-dimensional space, the air space. And this is what we are interested in within this mobile village.
So Sao Paulo is a critical hub. You obviously know it holds 10% of Brazil's population, but it's the Manhattan, let's say, of Latin America. While the concentration of that population in the center of the city is decreasing. So this, near the Estación Luz, which is the area that we call our probe, is actually, or our Petri dish for this experimentation, we're finding that people are actually moving to the periphery and leaving this void.
So we have this asymmetric society, poverty on the one hand side, wealth on the other hand side, that now, since 10 years, democracy and also economic growth has actually turned into an upward mobility system. And we identified with the city of São Paulo, Elisabetta Franca, with Núñez Fornés, etc., this area where the city owns at this moment about 80 derelict buildings. They could be called skyscrapers. They are 20 to 30 floors high, and the city is also in the process of incorporating favela areas. A unique time window, if you want so, because the property situation, the decision-making situation is now in the hands of what we could call within this project a unique moment. We have civil society, from a favelado, a man living in a favela, up to the political leadership. We have universities involved in this project, and we have the cooperation involved in this concept. So we think this is a moment, an ideal moment, to act in a city on a very concrete side.
So what you see in this photograph, a well-known photograph, is two realities, two cities, obviously, competing one and the other, or actually needing each other, two sides of the same coin. But whereas the city on one side has 2 cell phones and no toilet, the city on the other side has the largest fleet of private helicopters.
So mobility is obviously an issue in that city, and it's an issue of money and it's an issue of time. The helicopter flight obviously costs 100 times what a bus ticket costs, and as these two worlds collide together, there's a lot to do and a lot to think of, and we believe that in this area around the loose stations, where we have identified one of those mobile villages, along with other mobile villages, and we had a list of 6 in the city that we lined out, that we mapped out. In between those mobile villages, there will be traffic as usual. Our vision is actually to look at the city as is. It's probably one of the hardest things to do today, to find out what's the first step. What do we actually have to do to come into a future vision? How do we actually start it? What's next? And this project tries to identify that and tries to guide a way and give also a concrete prototype, a pilot project.
So maybe some of you will know, you'll see it downstairs. We won't bother you with statistics, but one very important one, a Paulista spends 27 days of his life caught in traffic. So this is a true reality, and this thus begins the story of our panel, or our triptych that you will see below, which is this love story with mobility between Lucas and Maria.
So we tell you this story because it is also, let's say, you all saw it, it's Blade Runner in the tropics. It's the informal mobility which is already in place in the informal sector, in the favela, which is actually where Helio Oiticica comes from. That's the culture of Brazil. Let's not forget the strongest, the most profiled and interesting moments, maybe in all those presentations, are actually the particularities in each space. It's not the similarities. And as I looked at them, I think you can really measure that. There are things in common, but the most interesting things are the differences. And the favelas, they have those differences within the city of São Paulo. But we want to bring the intelligence of the informal city and the knowledge, the technological knowledge, that certainly is not easy to achieve for the people living there. We want to bring them together. We want to build this sort of ecology of mobility as a project that actually assists people, and at the end, let's not forget it, cities, the fabric, the ground material of cities are people. It's not the buildings, it's not the surface, it's not the vehicle, it's people who want to go from point A to point B. And we want to facilitate that in a 24/7 area in this mobile village to make mobility the driver of urban development and to make mobility actually a pleasure, a moment that you enjoy. Let's not forget, for a lot of you who might not live in South America or China or in the Bosphorus corridor, people have organized their lives. They are in a traffic jam, but they do things while they are there. They're using their telephone, they're having breakfast, they're shaving themselves, they have sex, they do all the things that you might do at home if you don't have traffic jams. So let's not forget that there's also a lifestyle involved, and we have to understand that we will not get rid of part of the things that we already started to get accustomed to and that we love, but we want to add something to it, and we want to make it just more perangolé, if you want so.
So what the problem is, you have a fragmented downtown, you have subway stops that don't arrive where the bus stops are, where the train stops are, where the actual locomotive trains are. So you have a real disconnect in this final kilometer radius. But what we're talking about and what we are going to do and show you is how we can connect those things in this downtown area. But it's not a real innovation, it's not a futurologist project, it's a project that looks at what's really happening now. Cable cars now are traversing cities, used as urban transport. You have informal vehicles, you have pedal push, you have elevators now, public elevators that lead you up the hillside communities into the favelas. So elevators that now are not privatized but public. You have boxing rings underneath highways. How can we maximize and potentialize this informal situation?
So in this sense, I would rather say, like in the rest of the work we have done in South America, we are rather moderators and initiators rather than inventors, and we find situations and we make them visible. And this is maybe the larger achievement, that the people who are caught, who live in that city, have actually not the capacity to put those pieces together. They need somebody who assists them in that, and I would say this vision that we're proposing for the city of São Paulo in the next year, 2 years for the next São Paulo Biennale, where we would like to show all the projects here with our curator, Ligia Nobre. That would be the idea.
So mobile villages represent nodes, independent points of urban concentration, full of unique programming. These nodes inform one another and are connecting on a metropolitan and local scale through a network of public, private, and shared mobility routes. These mobility routes are in 5 scales: rethinking the collective mobility, rethinking the idea of surfaces, rethinking how to navigate the city, rethinking how to navigate the city with transformative capacities, rethinking how to navigate the city and new scales of modes of mobility. So how does that work? We call it the syncretic city. It means overlaying, using the 3-dimensional space, the pancake that cities already have. But we don't believe in master plans, and that's why we do it in these little probes. The master plan for a city of 20 million people is impossible. And actually, mayors have their hands tied. They have all these compartments, and all the knowledge is compartmentalized. How can we create a university for the city, or let's say kind of integration? And how would you do it? By trying out one probe. One probe is one of these circles that we're going to concentrate right in on. These hubs that we call the last kilometer, let's say. And these hubs are using abandoned buildings and bringing cable cars in, connecting them with metro stops below, connecting them with escalators, and incentivizing buildings in this pancake to connect. But like Hong Kong, giving incentives for if you open up your ground floor, your second floor, your third floor, or sky lobbies, to create an infinite loop of mobility, utilizing rooftops, middle parts of buildings, etc. And having a productive open city. So not a mono development of blocks individually, but actually having a horizontal and diagonal mobility through the city. This is the probe. Here we begin to see the elevator systems, the public elevators, the hubs, and we call this the 3D city.
There are obviously questions which are operational and maintenance. We have worked with the industry, and we know that the key probably into the future is not to make the next technological project, but how do we actually define over time how we use something. You all have a copy machine or something at home, and you know that the toner costs more than the machine itself. So we figured out how can you actually liberate mobility from the building. How could you think in clusters of buildings where the mobility, an elevator, a vehicle, just like a vehicle, stands outside of an individual house, a skyscraper, and serves multiple buildings. And how can that become interesting? Sao Paulo has already, in this test field around the Luz station where we work, made an auction of airspace, but this is not the airspace that we know from New York, from Manhattan. They've actually auctioned airspace horizontally. That means that we're stratifying ownership, which is usually bound to plot sizes, but I explained to you earlier that now the city has actually a lot of this ownership, and the favelas, unclear, foggy ownership. We can stratify suddenly cities horizontally, and that is becoming very interesting, that you can bring in the downtown again anchor stores of a certain caliber, of a certain size, that would never have thought to move into a downtown area because they don't get the right shop sizes, that you bring back social housing into the city center, but by transforming it from the favelas, which was a sort of a monofunctional, modernistic scheme of housing, that you bring some of this social housing right into the derelict towers, in the area of the derelict towers. And let's not forget, by reorganizing population, by creating a sort of a mobility of services, you can avoid a lot of the mobility of the individual. If you go to a favela, you will see that people actually carry the trash out of their neighborhood, and that the supermarkets deliver the services into the favela, the goods. Exactly the opposite what you do, because you go to the supermarket with your car and the trash is picked up at your house door. So we think there's a lot of logistics, operational and maintenance concepts that in this area, in this circle that we have identified, can be put right now, tomorrow if you want. So on a test field, you can measure it, you can feel the effects, you can see them, and you can build up on them fragmentally, and as a process.
So what we take is a real part of the city. We develop the streets that will be accessible by trucks. We time it and program it during the day. We have a highway hub connection that then leads you to a cable car to the center where logistics are coming through and goods are being delivered to the center. And we actually free up the city. And the mobility levels change no matter what level you're on. You have different choices. You use, obviously, the apps. Everyone has been using apps to suggest pathways of movement based on user consumer territorial reference points, indicating productive ways to move between these multi-surface stratas.
So as Alfredo jumps to the film, because we have 2 minutes left, I just learned here, just think about Brazil, and the image that you have in mind is probably the beaches of Rio. The beaches of Rio will be in the future only an hour and a half away from Luz Station, which is now a 19th century station with rather derelict trains. That means you will be in the future, be at the beach, living in the middle of São Paulo. And what is greater for Helio Oiticica, the man from the favelas, than to be on a weekend with 10,000 people all together on the beach, where you see the most robust and interesting space in an urban setting. And we would think that mobility, transportation, and the show of movement, Parangolé, works best on a beach, a city like a beach.
But the idea is that this probe, this test site, would become a beach because it would become an incredibly fun place. And you would be able to look on top of the buildings from outside what's happening inside. There'll be a color coding that would tell you what's happening on each level. So from the outside, you'll be able to read that city and be able to know the destination visually that you want to go. And here is the triptych you'll see downstairs, which describes the path of Lucas and Maria as they navigate through this city, looking to have fun, to meet, to work, to pick up their mother, using the mobile apps to distribute themselves, and finally end up on the beach, as Hubert said, on the top of a building with a concert. And this is our little film that should be on. That just gives you a sensation of this test site. It's a little bit Archie Graham influence, but we like these graphics.
You see the different mobile, is the film running? Yes.
Yeah.
You see the different mobile villages. In between the villages, traditional transportation systems, mass transportation systems, if you want so, metro, train, highways, etc. Then one of the villages here in the center, the mobile village of La Luz. And if you move further in, you would leave your car at the periphery as a primary service. You could maybe still use it. There would be choices, freedom. We don't think the regulations are working anyways in cities. You will soon find out how to undercut them. And you will have several of such villages. They would work 24 hours. They would also suck up all the activity from the rest of the cities. So if you wake up at midnight, you want to get a hot dog, or you want to have your clothes brought to the laundry, that would be the place where to go. Shell, for instance, has just decided to suspend all gasoline stations in the city. We have about 10 of them inside that area that we have, and we're using this extra territory, this possibility to have land available, and we introduce those different stratas of mobility, of choice, and to bring Maria from the favela and Lucas from the suburb together in one interesting, vibrant cityscape.
So finally, Urban Parangolé liberates the ground plane, engaging possibilities of a three-dimensional urban space. Thank you.
Thank you.